raised children. They're up and out of the house. You've got a theory on vacation with small children, and I think this is the data people are really wanting to hear.
Can you hear my theory? Hello, everyone.
You say you just go back.
Yes. So my theory is vacation is a myth that single or childless people make up to torture people with children so that they can fantasize about traveling and relaxing, and then they actually do it and they feel worse than when they left in the first place.
So vacation is for grammars and scammers. That's what I heard.
I mean, my new verbiage for this is it is a trip. It is a family trip. We are traveling. We are doing the same thing we do at home. Well, more of the same thing we do at home because we work less and run after wild mongoose more. Mongoose. Yep. So, it's
mongooses, I think. I think it's mongooses.
Mongooses? Okay.
No, mongooses doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
No.
Vacation with children is real work.
Yes.
But if you can convince your, parents to say, "Oh, I want them for a week."
The handoff? So
then you can find vacation. That's the only way. So it's like Tom Sawyer painting the fence and convincing others that they would rather do that. I don't know how you do it, but you work on that.
So Jerry, do people, by people I mean your family, drop off grandchildren with you for weeks at a time?
Not me. No. I saw this coming. I read Tom Sawyer. It is what it is. No, I did not do that.
It is very rare. When we had one, we now have two. When we had one, we could leave him with my parents, and he was okay. They're not able to handle two of them for a few hours, let alone for a week.
So in January, I am taking my two of my grandchildren. They'll be 13 and 15 at the time for a week.
Great.
But that'll be the first time.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's much easier. And as a matter of fact, my daughter is scared to death of leaving two impressionable teenagers.
With you.
I was just going to say, at that age with you, it's not about what they'll get into. It's
not
about
good.
What they'll be inspired to do.
Yeah. And I've got a room full of wine. So what the hell?
Oh my gosh. With that, is everybody ready to get started?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it.
Welcome to the CXR channel, our premier podcast for talent acquisition and talent management. Listen in as the CXR community discusses a wide range of topics focused on attracting, engaging, and retaining the best talent. We're glad you're here.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another edition of Recruiting Community Podcast. I am your host, Michelob, and I'm going to bring in my co-host and spirit animal, Mondello. Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, Jerry, it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Haven't seen you since, a week ago. When we were out at Nike.
Nike was, first of all, the weather was great. So while we're watching the weather, being over 100 everywhere else, it was lovely from that point of view. But Nike's headquarters, hands down, is one of the most unusual and interesting places anyone would want to go.
Yeah, I would put the Nike HQ in Beaverton against any other. We've probably seen well over 1,000 of them. To be fair, I've not been to some of their biggest competitors' campuses, but I will say I think Nike was doing cool campuses and amazing campuses long before, and on a much bigger scale than the Facebooks and the Amazons. I think we even had somebody who was like, "Have you been to our campus at the Amazon? Have you seen them?" Like, I don't think you understand when we say world class at Nike and their headquarters, we mean world class.
The fact that they have hundreds of volunteer guides who have to get certified by each other on the stories that they can tell, I think it kind of tells part of that story.
So for those who don't know, and as a reminder, this is a live stream, live chat. So if you're watching this on one of the socials or networks that has a live chat or a little chat window, go ahead and ask questions in there, share LinkedIn profiles in there, share whatever you want to share, talk to one another. But if you've got questions for the guest today, and we'll get right to her, she's patiently waiting. We'll jump into that and we'll make sure we get those all addressed. So with that, coming back to Nike. So we had, for those who don't know, we had about 30 companies come out where for 2.5, almost 3 full days, we not only did a fun nonprofit charity work, but we did countless case studies, competitive practice shared. The networks are stronger. And then, of course, the epic hosts and Kismet and the global head of early career and college and campus and recruiting out there for Nike, just a fantastic host. It's always one of my favorite places to go. Always. Did you have a big takeaway?
Who, me?
Yeah, on the topic, not on the campus, but on the. Was there an aha or an OMG moment for you?
I have a dozen of them. There were, but the range of experience was quite broad, and I'm always interested in whether or not we learn from each other. I mean, I believe in it, and someone who is just coming into our space and what they observe, to me, is great learning or reminding, if you will. And so we had a few of those. There were a couple fairly new to recruiting or to early career recruiting who were doing some amazing work.
Yeah.
And there were solid companies that for many years are still elevating the game. So I'm just very impressed where things are.
Yeah, I liked the earlier in career perspective, so it was pretty helpful. So I'll say that we send out an executive summary. So if you're a member and you're watching or listening, we've got an executive summary that will come out in just a couple of weeks, where we kind of throw all of that together. We've already shared, I think, 30 some odd case studies and documents. They're in the online library that everybody contributed. Each company, as you know, comes to a meeting, is responsible for sharing a case study and output a question to the group. But upcoming, I think September 11th through the 13th, we'll be out at Edward Jones HQ in St. Louis, where we're going to be talking about candidate experience, Jerry, a topic near and dear, obviously, to your heart. But we've got one seat left for a guest member, so non-member, if they would like to attend. If you're interested in interviewing and seeing if you qualify to sit in the room with some of these really, really impressive people, just send an email to info@cxr.works. Anything you'd add for candidate experience, Jerry?
No.
Okay. That's it.
It's every stakeholder is critical, but only one of them doesn't really have a champion, and that's the candidate. We need internal champions for that stakeholder.
Yeah, good stuff. And then I think August 17th, we've got a virtual session on military recruiting, veteran recruiting. You're not going to miss that. You can also check it out. I'll throw this up here. I think we have these fancy little tools. There we go. Anybody's interested, they can check that out. cxr.work/events. August 17th, we're going to do military recruiting virtual, but also our monthly lecture is coming up on August 24th. We've been doing this. We're in the end. We're wrapping up our second year of bringing in TED speakers, that sort of thing, that level or caliber speaker to talk about topics that the leaders of the membership have picked. And I think we're talking on the 24th of being an inclusive leader. We've got Bernice Feller, Tim, who is a culture and inclusion strategist and a team performance coach. This is a big one. We did negotiations last time. We had tons of people registered. Jerry, we broke a record for registrants for the number of members registered. You want to guess how many people have registered to come to the lecture here in August?
If it's anywhere near the other one, 80 to 100.
Keep going.
It's going to be amazing if it's more than that.
It's 373. 373 members have registered to attend that. So if you're interested, you want to check that out, cxr.works/lectures. You can see that. You can check out the guests. I think we show you previous and, of course, upcoming members. And lectures. And if you're a member, you can just dial in and watch those. We keep them recorded in the library. Some of those are open to the public. We've got one by Antonia Forrester, and then we've got one with Glenn Cathy that we did. That's a lot of fun. We've opened those up to the public, so you can get into those. If you have trouble, let us know. Did I miss anything, Jerry?
No.
So I guess we should bring our guest in. Okay. All right. So I want to take a second. We'll welcome her in here. There we go. It's Diana, not Diane. It's Diana File, who's coming with us, DF Analytics and Consulting. Diana, why don't you give us kind of a sort of an elevator pitch on who you are and kind of why we should be listening to what you have to say.
Thanks, everyone. My dog also wants to give her elevator pitch.
Saving your life right now. You just don't realize the dog is saving your life, probably.
Yes. So I'm Diana File. So great to be here. I'm a research psychologist by background, and I've spent my career creating a bunch of proprietary metrics and approaches to debias data science for DEI purposes. Currently doing that through my consulting company, DF Analytics, and we are a tech-driven neuroscience-based data analytics strategy and training firm. And we have a suite of services around DEI, as I mentioned. We also do a lot of work around change management, M&A, and HR solutions more broadly, again, from that data-driven strategic perspective.
Good stuff. All right. So we've got about 15 minutes sort of set aside to talk about some of the work that you're doing. And what I had kind of asked you, I think, early on, happy to have you share some stuff out, but any big call outs, any big takeaways?
From my work in general?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think data science and analytics specifically are one of the most misunderstood and poorly used areas of DEI specifically. And HR in general, I think people come to the HR practice not because they love numbers necessarily. They love people, they love words and stories and helping people. Maybe they love operations, but data doesn't always come naturally to folks. And I think when we look at classically the way HR has been run or DEI has been run, in both of those areas, we really see a lot of reliance on anecdotal or gut-driven instinct to make decisions. So my mission in life has been to bring data to those fuzzy, unmeasurable things. I believe everything is measurable, and if it's not, you shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a good call out. The science aspect of the art. I mean, Jerry, you were just out at sort of, what would you say, adjacent related, but you were just out at a PSYOP conference not too long ago, and we were talking about bringing more quantitative tactics, right? More data-driven tactics into recruiting. We've been talking about it for a long time. Remember with Moneyball and data, we were using that all the time in recruiting, but I think it's taken a number of years, I think, for us to finally just sort of, what would you say, accept that or really begin to adopt that more broadly? Oh, I think you're muted, Jerry. Did we lose him? Okay, his hat, he pointed to his hat. Maybe his hat's. So Diana, while Jerry's sorting that out, would you say the same thing across the board?
I'm sorry. What's the question again?
I managed to unmute myself. Never mind. It's another question. I agree with you, Diana, 100%. If you can't measure it, you can't do anything with it. It's not anecdotal. It's nothing. We really need to be in a position where we can say, we have at least a hypothesis of what this number looks like, or what this index should be, or where we should be in relation to it on some kind of dimension, so that when we take action, we can see a change or not. And fundamentally, we can then ask ourselves, is there another measure that we're not looking for, or is our action just useless? So I'm just a fan of the fact that we need to be able to do this in talent acquisition and human resources.
I would agree, and just piggybacking on that, the flip side of it is people get really interested in measuring things for measurement's sake. And I think the other piece of it is how does the measurement impact the business and drive business value? So finding the right measurements rather than overwhelming people with data that frankly is more about the internal efficiency of, let's say, the HR department among itself versus how it drives business value. A classic example of this would be training. So people often report on how many hours of training employees have had. To me, that seems like rather a useless metric in a vacuum because I don't know what they've learned during those hours. I don't know how fast they learn. I don't know how engaged they are and what skill sets they've developed. So to me, if you're doing a training analysis, I want to know how that training has impacted whatever the goal of the training was. So if the goal was to increase leadership skill sets, then what was the leadership skill set number or metric before the training? What was it after, and how far did you move the needle? Did it vary among different groups? Was the training easier for some groups to follow? Was there, an effect of if you also had a mentor alongside your training journey, then your skill sets developed more quickly because you had one-on-one interaction? There's a lot of different ways we can think about it once we're focused on, okay, the point of this thing is we need better leaders so that we can make more money and be a better company, right?
So we're talking about, when we talk about, I guess, DE&I metrics and analytics, I guess, Diana, my question is, have you seen organizations advance past what we typically expect for DE&I data, diversity data to be reported on 5 years ago? Like, of the last 5 years, has it gone past people saying they're a veteran or self-identifying, whether they're their ethnicity or their gender? I mean, is it more than that now? Are we evolving in that front at all, or are we just gaining steam?
I like to believe we are. I mean, I think I've seen the business. So I've been consulting my entire career, which is about 15, 20 years now. And the DEI side of the analytics work I do has exploded since 2020. That being said, people got really excited about doing all different kinds of data around DEI, and I can list the different ways we've gotten past it since 2020. But this year has been a challenge, and we've seen a lot of companies regress and go back to not taking DEI as seriously in the wake of, naysayers gaining voice politically. The recent SCOTUS ruling being a classic example of that. What you're talking about is really how classically, civil rights or EEO data is reported with diversity numbers. There's a lot of problems in the way that data was traditionally handled, not least of which I think there is a tacit encouragement to get 100% of your data in there. And so HR directors are often guessing people's identities and filling them in for them instead of having the employees fill it in, because they can't get employees to disclose their own data. So that's just one small example. When you look at DEI more broadly, we have a 5-part framework that we like to think of when we think of DEI data. Diversity is the first one, the diversity of your workforce currently, but also your applicant pool and all the stages of that applicant pool. And where do you see leaks in that pipeline? So we're talking when the people first learn about your company, when they meet, when they submit an application, when they meet the HR screener, when they go through an interview process, when they get an offer, when they accept an offer. All of those are stages where you're going to leak out people. And so if you're seeing a shift in the proportions of different races, ethnicities, gender, veteran status, LGBTQ, or any number of other dimensions, you're going to want to understand what's happening in that stage where we have an opportunity to improve it so that we see more consistency. The second part, after the D or the diversity focus, for me is engagement and culture, inclusivity. How do people, once they're in your workforce, actually interact and engage with each other so that employees are included? People feel like they belong. You get that data from surveys, focus groups, interviews, engagement survey data, exit survey data, stay interview data, pulse survey data, onboarding survey data. Anytime you interact with employees, you can also see a number of different metrics around how they work and collaborate with each other, which we can talk about without actually having to run surveys. The third part I talk about is accountability in leadership. So that's where we look at corporate governance. We look at how the board is structured, how the leaders are structured in terms of the diversity of the corporate leadership, their commitments they've made, any past DEI work that the organization has done. What are the KPIs? Are leaders held accountable? Is it part of their goals, their incentives? Pay equity fits in there as well, and a variety of other things. We look at brand perception or external visibility. So that could be like marketplace visibility, and that it's your customer feedback. Are your customers from different segments giving the same feedback, or are you getting specific feedback from certain customer segments? What's the market penetration in different customer segments, and how can we increase market penetration by increasing both the diversity and the engagement and the inclusion of different folks in our organization? And then moving into the last part, we look at external partnerships. So that would be your supplier diversity, your corporate responsibility efforts. All of these things can have metrics attached to them, internships, ways that you are investing in the future of talent so that you're not just looking at who's applying right now, but how are you nurturing relationships with different communities so that you're building talent. I mean, as some organizations call it, kindergarten to careers. So yeah, the more progressive organizations are really taking a broad look. And I would say my clients mostly are trying to expand that way. And you've got stodgier industries and organizations that still very much focus on the D. I think in the wake of what's been happening, especially with the affirmative action repeal, people are going to have to either abandon DEI and, fold their business and become dinosaurs, or if they're going to engage in DEI, they're going to have to look more expansively beyond just the diversity numbers, because there's going to be more impediments legally in place for them to focus on those targets as well.
But I feel like a big devil's advocate, right? So we've been doing this a while. I feel like this interest, this cyclical wave of interest in diversity. It's not the first time we've seen it. I've been in the space about 30 years. It's not the first time we see it. We see this big push. There's some sort of social event or social injustice that happens. I'll use the murder of George Floyd as a really great example, unfortunately. But there's this swelling interest all of a sudden about, we're supposed to make this right. We should be better. We should know by now. We're going to invest in doing the research. We're going to hire more diversity at the C level. We're going to hire somebody who's in charge of all diversity at the C level. We're going to, but then what inevitably seems to happen is this wanes. And then we see some of those diversity leaders who have been hired put into more like project manager roles, or begin to slowly fade into the background, or the passion of collecting the data and doing something actionable with the data, and these insights seems to wane. And I heard you when you were saying like it does kind of pitter off a bit, and maybe it's political climate, but this seems like, to me, this is not the first time this has happened.
Yeah.
And I just love your take on, is this just going to be a constant roller coaster for us if, pushing organizations? Because I think we said the last time and the time before, they're going to have to close their doors and they were going to have to go under.
Yeah. I agree with you. Yes, it's cyclical, and the trends demographically in our country are increasingly pointing to there will be a point at which we are going to be a majority minority culture, right? Like already, I think the demographic of teenagers, 16 years old, that range is majority people of color, if I'm not mistaken. And so it might take longer than a few decades. Maybe it'll take our generation, right? My generation to be, the next generation to see, the full swing and shift. But increasingly organizations are going to see that their workforce, they won't be able to reach the workforce they want, fight for the talent they need, and innovate the way they need to serve the future because of where the market, where the economics and the demographics are heading. And I hope that organizations that are forward thinking will look at the solid evidence, because as you say, yes, it's cyclical. And we also have 30 or 40 or however many decades, years of evidence showing that connections between profitability, financial impact, ROI of investment in people, and DEI investment is strong. So you can either look at the data or you can ignore it. And I guess you'll always have companies that do, foolish, short-term kind of thinking in terms of how they make decisions. You always have those companies.
So it sounds to me like you're saying that with the demographic shift that's coming, and by the way, if you're currently a majority and worried about being a minority, maybe that's because of how you treat minorities, but that's a whole nother podcast. But it sounds to me like with the demographic shift coming up, what you're saying is, even though that's cyclical, we're taking 2 steps forward with only 1 step back, because the demographic shift.
I hope so. Yeah. Look, I don't have a crystal ball, right? But I do watch the trends, and I am seeing people take it seriously that are, kind of forward thinking. And I hope more companies do.
Well, so I'll ask you another question, which is kind of it. So Jerry and I do a series of benchmarks, and I think we have 3 open benchmark surveys now. Our members will call us up and say, hey, we'd like to know what other orgs are doing for this or that. And we push that survey out and it comes back. And one of the things we tell them is, while this information is really helpful, when we collect it from a larger audience, the best place you should be measuring is against yourself. And Jerry has a stance on what is the average whatever. And Jerry, if you want to jump in with that, but when somebody asks for an average number, but I guess my question to you is, do you sort of see the same thing, or do people come to you and say, I need to compare myself against the whole industry or the whole world, and they haven't kind of looked inward yet? Or how does that work in your space?
I mean, I think it's a push-pull, right? I think some organizations are really excited about doing the work internally for reasons that don't require competition. Most of those organizations also I've noticed will be like, oh, we're so unique, we're different. We don't really have a lot of competitors. So for them, you'll see that they are looking more at themselves. And maybe they've done some of that internal work initially. Now they want to expand, and they are like, okay, so what's our competition doing to get ideas, right? What's the latest and greatest? I will also say that benchmarks are really tricky because if no one in your industry has gotten this right, then how do you know measuring yourself against them is the right benchmark? So a classic example of this, going back to diversity data, is people will look at the kind of available talent in a specific region, given the assumptions of how your recruiting strategy currently works, and kind of keeping all things equal. So I had a client in Long Island that was a nonprofit. It was small. And we did some numbers on how they were 80% white and 90% female and all this stuff. And they were like, well, what do you want? Long Island is a white place. And it's hard to find that talent here. We recruit locally. We require people to come into the office. Mm-hmm. This is the pool of talent. That's what we've got. And it's like, how do we then work together to think about evolving the strategy so that maybe you are going to invest in stipends for people to come from and relocate from a different region. Maybe you will invest in, building stronger relationship with the communities around you, and just thinking more broadly. I think, let's say another example. So I've worked with some law firms where same question, right? Mm-hmm. It's really hard to find people of color who are lawyers, especially women of color. The legal profession is just heavily white. What do you want from us, right? And when they benchmark against each other, it's like, oh, we're 80% white and the benchmark is 85, so I guess we're okay. Versus how do we look systemically at the education system and the things that companies can do to influence the ways that people get weeded out and the systemic barriers that prevent them from getting the law degree in the first place, so that we can expand the pipeline and the talent pool much more broadly than we could if we were just looking at people who are already at the professional experience level with the credentials you're expecting. So kind of expanding to look at the labor market more broadly than people have been looking at it to date.
I love the way you're looking at thinking it through from an innovation point of view is really the key. And it's why I think a lot of people get screwed up with benchmarking, is because the purpose of benchmarking is not to find the best practice. It's to be inspired about competitive practices. And if once you've deconstructed why someone wants to benchmark, you focus in on those key things that people are doing or not doing, not so much to copy them, but to be inspired about the kind of thinking, whether you're going over the wall, through the wall, under the wall, or around the wall in some way, shape, or form. And that, I think, is why there's such value in peers having conversations about what they do in an open and honest way. And that's why I'm such a fan of that approach to learning.
I agree. And one thing I forgot to say is also some companies will do the benchmarks before they do the internal work, as you pointed out, Chris. And often what happens is we've tried to do some internal work. We've run into roadblocks. The way we get buy-in with leadership is by kind of lighting a fire under them to show, hey, look, 10 out of our 11 competitors, are all doing this more than us, are succeeding at it. Here are the numbers. Here's how their financial impact has grown. We're losing ground, right? So that kind of blows away the resistance of, we're making money, it's okay, right? We don't need to do this.
When I worked for Johnson & Johnson many, many years ago, the rule in that corporation for almost 80 years at the time was that when 80% of our admired competitors were doing it, we would then consider doing it. And once we decided we would do it better than anyone else.
Did it work?
It worked fine for, the 10 years that I was there, until I said, I'd really like to do something first. And that's when I left J&J.
Yeah. How about we don't wait to jump on the bandwagon? Yeah. Why don't we create the bandwagon?
Yeah. I threw a question up here. Didn't know it was going to cover half of Jerry there. If you're watching, I apologize. Juan's got a big question here, so I'll take it off in a second. But he says he finds it interesting how individuals are choosing to identify themselves. He says he's noticed a number of individuals that are from a mixed background, but who are identifying as white.
Is that a question or?
It looks like he's making a statement, but I wonder. I mean, it brings me to sort of full circle back to when you had said earlier. What I heard you say was survey. Yeah, and it's. I don't know a better way to collect some of that information. But I'm just wondering, do we see a lot of that? I wouldn't call it gamification, but just kind of really, fudging the corners to just try to work.
That's a really interesting question. We don't know anything about how other people choose to identify themselves unless they tell us, or unless we ask them, which is why I don't encourage people to guess. That being said, you could speculate. There could be a number of different phenomena going on. Maybe it doesn't feel safe to identify about who I feel I am. And if I'm white passing, I'd rather kind of go along with whatever privilege I get by saying that. Maybe the categories in the survey or the system you're using to identify people are not fleshed out enough and are not reflective. I know like the government categories basically are 10 years behind whatever people actually identify as. Perfect example, Middle Eastern, North African, not a category, but a lot of organizations, it's not a government category, but a lot of organizations are adapting it because those folks don't know where else to put themselves, and often they're not white. So, it could be lots of different things going on there. I also think there's a tendency, especially with the younger generation, to avoid labels. Like, I don't want to label myself. I don't want to put myself in a box. And it's okay to say, I don't know, right? Or I don't choose not to identify.
Yeah, here's got Yamahira. I hope I say that correctly. I was always asked to mark white because there was not a Hispanic Latino option.
That's surprising because the government has one in the census, but maybe I don't know when that was developed or added.
Yeah.
And also that's often listed as, I think, race and ethnicity separate. And one of them has Hispanic Latino or not Hispanic Latino, and the other one has all the other categories, which I find really confusing.
Yeah, your comment about it being a safe space sort of resonates. We had and with the military recruiting, veteran recruiting event coming up, oftentimes organizations struggle to gather that demographic of data because a lot of times veterans aren't identified.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, what they don't realize, I think, and what we're talking with our leaders is they're not doing a good job of explaining why the data is being collected, that it is to get more funding, to help more veterans, to move these programs forward, not, like you said, from a safe space perspective, not to put them in a bucket or sort of alienate or segregate them so much. And I wonder if we have an opportunity to do that from a self-reporting standpoint with ethnicity and gender.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, one of the services we provide is helping organizations run communication campaigns around data gathering in general and creating communication strategies. We have a number of folks who have very senior experience on our team who do that. And one thing we find with self-identification campaigns, people are not good at communicating in order to get that engagement. Because A, you need to communicate how the data will be used. B, you need to communicate how the data will be protected. And C, what often happens is organizations fail to acknowledge that, hey, we've messed this up in the past. People have messed this up in the past. This data has a history of being misused because, let's not talk about that, right? But getting vulnerable and actually being authentic and saying, look, we recognize that this data, is very personal to you. Here's how we're going to protect it and treat it. Here's the thing. There's the list of people who have access to it, and the list of people who everyone else won't. And here's the encryption. As much information and transparency as you're willing to offer to people, and then say, look, if we've screwed this up in the past, we are committed to not screwing it up again.
Yeah. I think the communication aspect is a big call.
And here's how it will be deleted.
Yep. Yes. And you should have a policy around, data security, data privacy. People don't often have those. And especially we write policies specific to DEI data because they should be, it should be treated differently and dealt with differently. And in a large organization, okay, what are the parameters once I get my, if I'm a manager and I get a list of headcount, and here's the breakdown by 5 different demographic groups, who am I allowed to share it with? Right. And people will share it freely if they don't know there's a policy, because there might not be a policy.
Or they hold it so tight that people who need it in order to do their jobs don't have access.
That's right, because it's always easier to restrict,
Yep.
kind of a blanket restriction than to know and understand the nuance, which requires working with legal and crafting kind of forward-thinking policies where you really balance the transparency and the confidentiality issues. The other thing I'd say about self-disclosure, leveraging your ERGs is a really easy way to increase self-disclosure rates. And that's a whole nother topic for another day. But people do find that having a safe space where you can talk about people of similar identity groups and helping, maybe giving them talking points or helping them gather data in different ways can increase disclosure rates as well, rather than here's this announcement that came by email. How am I supposed to trust it? I don't even know this person.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Well, look, Diana, we asked this, we're kind of at times, but so I want to make sure that we give you a chance to answer. We ask all of our guests this question at the end of the show. If you were going to write a book about this topic and where it's at today and the work that you're doing, what would the title of that book be and why?
So the title would be Bringing Hard Numbers to Soft Guesses, How to Debias Traditional Research Methods. The working title.
Yeah. Do you have a working book? Is there maybe, are you already drafting?
I'm taking to think about it.
Yeah.
One day when I have lots of free time and someone to ghostwrite it for me. But why? But my tagline, my company tagline is Bringing Hard Numbers to Soft Guesses. And I think the reason for that title is because I think people, spend too much, as we talked about, spend too much time guessing or assuming that things can't be quantified. And the subtitle as debiasing traditional research methods. I think the way that research traditionally is conducted, certainly the way I learned to conduct research, psychological research on human beings, is full of bias. And I've spent my life trying to debias it and find areas and new techniques to amplify the voices of groups that are historically marginalized by those methods.
I love that. Well, so let us ask you, present company excluded, who gets the first signed copy of your book?
My husband.
Oh, that's nice.
Because I couldn't have done it without him.
Good.
That's lovely. Well, look, Diana, we're so grateful for you to give us a lot of time. Much gratitude. We know that you're super busy, and we just want to thank you for the work that you're doing and putting leaders forward. And it's such an amazing endeavor. So thanks for leaning all the way in to just help push stuff forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This has been a really fun discussion.
Yeah, fun chat. I'm going to put you in the green room for just 2 seconds, so don't go anywhere.
Sure.
We'll drop you in there. There we go. And then really quickly, Jerry, I thought we could just give a quick mention and a follow-up. TA Talk Tank, it's been out for a couple months now.
Yes.
We have a nonprofit. For those who aren't aware, we have a nonprofit that has created this. It does a number of projects, platforms, both in-person charity events, that sort of thing. But we launched a couple of months ago, tatalktank.com. And Jerry, you give a way better elevator pitch of what this is than I do. My elevator pitch ends up going like for 5 minutes. So why don't you share what TA Talk Tank is? Because we got about 150.
But I never gave the same thing twice. I think it's the softest approach to the word mentor that we can get right now. And essentially, it's a non-formal way for you to pick the brain of just about anybody who's interested and willing to talk to you about your job, your career, or your life stage that's, connected to those two things. And the fact is, all of us want to be able to tap into that kind of thought, wisdom, whatever, of people who've done it before you. And the fact is, you're willing, most of us are willing to do that as well. So all of this is a platform where literally 100 plus people have profiled themselves as willing to talk to you and some indication of who they are and what they're about. And my feeling is do two things. One, take a look at that list. There's got to be a few people that you go, oh, I'd really like to pick the brain of that person. And if it works for you, then profile yourself as one of the people on TalkBack.
Yeah, you can be, I'm both. You can be a mentor or mentee or coach or coachee, or someday we'll come up with a better term, but you can list stuff you want to talk about and list stuff you want to learn about and do a nice matchup. And it's just this. It's maybe a 30-minute conversation with somebody. It's not a big formal program, and it's free. It's from CXR Foundation. It's TA Talk Tank Labor of Love. Lots of just wonderful people have been part of that program to put it together. And we just encourage everybody to get out there. And
especially if you're in transition. This is you're late to getting this done.
Well, they're just, slow adopters or fast followers. Let's call them fast followers. Yeah. All right. With that, we'll see everybody next week. Say bye, Jerry.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the CXR channel. Please subscribe to CXR on your favorite podcast resource and leave us a review while you're at it. Learn more about CXR at our website, cxr.works, facebook.com and twitter.com/careercrossroads, and on Instagram @careerxroads. We'll catch you next time.